Anger is reaching all-time highs this morning following another attack in Jerusalem. 4 Israelis were killed, along with 2 Palestinian attackers, but it was done in a synagogue during prayers, which was a really exacerbating thing here. It made it even worse for the people in that region. And what does it tell us now about the Middle East? This is one major issue that the United States has to deal with, and it will have to be dealt with on the congressional level. Of course, there are a lot of other issues as well. So let's bring in people from both sides of the aisle who are going to have to try and find a way forward. Congressman Peter Welch, Democrat from Vermont. Congressman Steve King, Republican from Iowa. Thank you to both of you gentlemen. I'll start with you, Representative King. When you hear about this done in a synagogue, that matters. We haven't really heard about that before. Yes, during Seders, there's been violations of religious time with violence, but not like this. Does this up the stakes, and what should the U.S. be?
Well, it does up the stakes, and when you terrorize people where they worship, that's an extra assault on a people. The Israelis do a good job of defending themselves generally, and they keep their streets fairly safe. If you're there, even in the evenings, you'll still see people that are walking around with their weapons. The United States need to support Israel. I don't think this is something we need to intervene in, but it tells you that an Arab can live in Israel proper with their rights of citizenship, own property, be seated on the Supreme Court, for example, or in the Knesset. I think the Israelis have been very tolerant, and they're being attacked by the other side. They needed defense to protect themselves. I'm not sure how they got in and how this happened. I understand that they were residents that got armed inside, so I don't know enough yet at this point.
Do you think there's a role for the U.S., Congressman Welch, about trying to somehow modulate what is the heavy-handed response from Israel, or do you think they just stay out?
Well, obviously, the government has to be the one that's primarily in charge of maintaining the security for its own citizens. We would certainly have that response. We do have that responsibility here. But the United States is very involved. We've been very engaged, obviously, in supporting Israel, but we've also been very much engaged in trying to promote a peace process. This is an appalling incident. Steve King is right about that, attacking people in their place of worship. And generally, when that is done, it is essentially has as its goal not just killing the people, but escalating the tensions to try to interfere with any possibility of making progress on peaceful negotiations.
Almost guarantees more of the same. We'll be seeing it. I hope I'm wrong, but almost guarantees it. Let's move on to something that's a trickier situation for the U.S. Representative King, we understand that there's going to be a review of hostage policy. Do you think the U.S. should reconsider negotiating with terrorists, using ransoms? Do you think that would make a difference with animals like ISIS?
I'd say no, it wouldn't make a difference. If you negotiate, if you pay ransom, you're going to get more hostages taken. There'll be more kidnappings. This goes back into our history to something like 1798, when 20% of our budget was used to pay tribute to the Barbary pirates. And that's where the expression, millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute. I think that's the right standard. And I do think, though, that they need to improve their coordinations between the agencies and do other things possible to help get these hostages free. I'm afraid this is not the last beheading we will see. And we need to take a much more aggressive approach towards ISIS and take them on in the Middle East. And I want to arm the Kurds, and we're going to have to defeat the caliphate. That's our objective. We need to move forward on that.
Representative Welch, do you think you need to change the policy with how the State Department deals with hostages' families? They are consistently feeling disrespected. They come on TV and say that they feel lost. Does that have to change?
Yeah, it definitely does. I mean, what Steve said, I pretty much agree with respect to hostages. One, we can't negotiate, we can't pay ransom. But number two, we do have to be as compassionate and as open and as accommodating to these families that find themselves in this incredibly tragic situation. And what you've seen, this is new for us. So you've had a bunch of different departments that have had their responsibilities and haven't been trained to figure out how to deal with these families in enormous stress. So having this review and basically, I think, having coordination in probably a single point of contact that can give real answers in real time, as much as we know, to these families will give them at least some solace that government hasn't forgotten them.
That would be great, and I am dizzy with excitement that you two gentlemen are agreeing so much. I hope it carries into the next topic. We'll see. The Keystone Pipeline, Congressman King, give me the case for why this is good for America.
Well, I can think of no reason why it wouldn't be good for America. There's a tremendous amount of oil up in the oil sands in northern Alberta. The Canadians have been negotiating with the Chinese. They're going to pipeline to the west to the Pacific Ocean and put that heavy crude oil on tankers and ship it over to China to refine it, unless we build a pipeline down through the United States to a refinery on the Gulf Coast. You can build pipelines safely all over this country. I may be the only member of Congress that's actually built pipelines. And by the way, we aren't worried about polluting the Ogallala Aquifer going through Nebraska. If you look at the safety of the Alaska pipeline, which carried about 2 million barrels at its peak, 2 million barrels a day, there's been minimal environmental impact on that pipeline. Our technology is so much better. We can build this so that it's safe, creates about 40-some thousand jobs. It's an economic stimulus to our country. And by the way, even if some of that oil or even all of that oil gets exported, the Canadians are going to export it anyway, and we have a chance to keep it here and buy it. They're going to sell it to the highest bidder, so all we have to do is put in a bid.
Congressman Welch, you're smiling, but I say it's not an agreement.
No, I don't agree. There's two issues. One is the oil, but the other is the process, and that's really what we're talking about here. When you do have a major pipeline, there is a process that is followed, and essentially what Congress has done is acted as like a planning board, and with 535 of us here, we're acting as though we can exempt this project from the standard review process. Secondly, we're giving an earmark, in effect, to TransCanada, saying that they, unlike other companies, don't have to pay into a mitigation fund in the event there is an environmental spill. And then third, this is really about politics. We've got a Republican in the House who's running for the U.S. Senate in Louisiana. We've got a Democrat in the Senate in Louisiana running desperately for re-election. And this is all about trying to give one or the other of them an edge up. And that is not the way we should be making a decision on a major pipeline that is going through environmentally sensitive areas.
All right, those are the two sides on that position. We'll see what the president does. He's expected to veto it, and then we'll have the next round of discussion whether it moves forward over that veto or not. Last issue, immigration. Do you think, Congressman King, you came on this show and you created some controversy when you said that all these families were so worried about their young girls that they were sending up here, that they were preparing them to be raped. And a lot of people were very upset about that comment, but at least it showed that you had some sensitivity to the plight of these families. Do you think there's a chance that the Republicans and the Democratic brothers and sisters can get together and do something to help these families so the president doesn't have to use his executive order?
Well, the president is never going to have to use his executive order, but I would say to the families that were upset about what I had to say about their vulnerability to rape, what I delivered was what I learned down there from caregivers. And we should be upset, all of us should be upset about a circumstance where families would send their daughters up with a 30 to 70% chance of being sexually abused on the way. That's appalling for me. I can't imagine doing that with, say, one of my granddaughters. But there is a chance that we can get together on some of this. The House passed a pretty good border security bill on August 1st. That sits there yet. The Senate could take that up during this lame duck session.
Doesn't protect those families.
Well, it does in this way. It sends people back instead of putting them into the custody of Health and Human Services, and everybody down on the border, Democrats and Republicans, Hispanics and non-Hispanics, all said they will keep coming unless you send them back. And that's what must happen. We cannot have an open borders policy. We'll empty out Central America, and the United States is going to be buried under the burden of the social services that we so willingly provide.
Final word, Congressman Welch, on this issue. Well, I appreciated the tone of your question because it suggested both of us, both sides, have the responsibility to try to address some of these major issues. Immigration is a big deal in Vermont. We've got farm workers who are really essential to milking our cows. We've got high-tech folks that can't get H-1 visas to provide skills that we really need. And then we've got all these kids, many of whom were born here when they were 2 years old. They want to go to college, and they have to come out of the shadows. And I think we've got to get together, and I really appreciate the fact that the president is pressing the issue. We should work on this and get it done. Well, there's a lot of families at risk, and you know what happens when you separate kids from their parents. It's horrible. And those big employers who are hiring all those people, you don't hear enough from you guys down there in D.C. about how you're going to go after them. But Congressman Welch, King, always good to have you on New Day. Thank you for having a good debate about it today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
All right, Chris, Missouri.